I didn't realize I had married my trauma until I died and saw what I'd been doing to us both. My name is Rachel Anne Whitfield. I am 42 years old. I died for 18 minutes on March 7, 2021. And in those 18 minutes, I did not see what I expected to see. I did not see Grace waiting for me with open arms. I did not see a soft light pulling me into comfort. I saw the truth. The full, unedited, nowhere to hide truth about my marriage, about my husband, and about the woman I had quietly become over 12 years of carrying a wound I refused to put down. I thought Daniel was the problem. I thought I was the victim. And then I died and saw both sides. Every moment, every word, every wound I caused and refused to see. Before I go any further, if you have ever held on to something so long that it started to feel like part of your identity, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, because what I am about to share did not just change my marriage. It changed the person looking back at me in the mirror. And I need you to hear all of it. We looked like a good family from the outside. I want you to understand that first, because I think that is the part that makes this testimony so dangerous to ignore. We were the family at church that other couples looked at and felt encouraged. Daniel opened doors for me. I organized the hospitality team. We had 2 daughters, Lily and Grace, and on Sunday mornings we sat in the 4th row from the front, and we smiled, and we sang, and nobody in that building knew that we had not had a real conversation in 3 years. Not a real one. Not the kind where you actually say what you mean and look each other in the eye and mean what you say. We had logistics. We had schedules. We had school pickups and grocery lists, and did you pay the electric bill, and Grace has a recital Thursday. We had the infrastructure of a marriage. We did not have the marriage. And I told myself that was Daniel's fault. I had been telling myself that for 10 years. It started in year 2. We had been married 26 months when I found the messages. They were not explicit. There were no photographs, no hotel receipts, none of the things you see in movies that make the betrayal clean and simple and easy to name. What I found was worse in some ways, because it was intimate. It was a woman named Stephanie from his office, and the messages between them were full of the kind of conversations Daniel and I used to have when we were dating. She knew things about his childhood I had forgotten to ask about. She knew his favorite baseball memory. She knew that he still grieved his grandfather 6 years after the man had died. She knew him in a way that told me he had been talking to her the way a man talks to someone he trusts. And I have to stop here for a second because it is still hard to say. I had stopped being that person for him. I did not know it then. I was not ready to know it then. All I knew in that moment, sitting on the edge of our bed with his phone in my hand, was that something had been taken from me. Something I could never get back. And I made a decision in that moment, without even fully realizing I was making it. I decided that Daniel would spend the rest of our marriage paying for what he had done. I did not call it that. I called it being careful. I called it protecting myself. I called it surviving. He confessed before I even confronted him. I want to be fair about that. I came to him 2 days after I found the messages, and before I could speak, he sat down at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface the way men do when they are trying to hold themselves together, and he told me everything. He said it had never become physical. He said he had ended it 3 weeks before I found anything. He said he was ashamed in a way that had been eating him from the inside, and the way his voice broke when he said it, part of me believed him. A deep, quiet part of me believed every word. But I did not let that part speak. I let the other part speak. The part that had watched my mother stay in a house full of broken promises and call it faithfulness. The part that had decided, somewhere in my teenage years, that love was just a setup for loss. That part of me took Daniel's confession and filed it away not as a beginning of healing, but as a life sentence. Evidence. Proof of what I had always suspected men were capable of. We went to counseling. 3 months of it. I sat across from a kind woman named Dr. Pearson, and I said the right things. I used the right language. I talked about trust being broken and needing time to rebuild. Daniel held my hand in those sessions, and I let him, and I watched him try, and somewhere underneath all of it, I had already decided it would not matter. He could try forever. I had already closed the door. At home, the silence became its own language. I learned to use it the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. Precise. Controlled. When Daniel would reach for warmth, I would answer with logistics. When he apologized, I would accept it in a tone that made it clear the apology had not been sufficient. I kept a record. Not on paper. In my body. In the tightness of my jaw when he walked into a room. In the way I turned slightly away when he tried to touch my shoulder. In the careful, measured distance I maintained at every family dinner, every school event, every Sunday morning in that fourth pew. Our daughters noticed. Children always notice. Lily was 9 when she started sitting between us at restaurants. I told myself she just liked the middle seat. I told myself a lot of things. Daniel tried for years. He brought flowers on Tuesday evenings for no reason, and I put them in water without comment. He planned a weekend trip for our 10th anniversary, and I went, and I was pleasant, and I made sure nothing about my behavior could be called wrong. That was the thing. I was never wrong, technically. I was always composed. Always reasonable. Always the one who had been hurt. And that wound. I wore it like a crown. The morning of March 7, 2021 started the way most of our mornings started. In silence. Daniel was already downstairs when I came into the kitchen. He had made coffee, and there were 2 mugs on the counter, which was something he still did after all those years. 2 mugs. Every single morning. I used to think it was habit. That morning, standing at the top of the stairs watching him move quietly around the kitchen trying not to disturb me, I understood for the first time that it was not habit. It was hope. A small, stubborn, daily hope that today might be different. I walked past the mugs and poured myself a glass of water instead. He did not say anything. He had stopped reacting to things like that years ago. He had learned my patterns the way you learn the rules of a house you are not sure you are welcome in anymore. Stay small. Stay quiet. Do not give her a reason. And on most mornings, that careful navigation kept things from escalating into something neither of us had the energy for before 8 in the morning. But that morning he made a mistake. He was telling me something about a project at work, something about a presentation he had coming up, and he mentioned a name. He said, Sarah from the Henderson account said the client wants revisions by Friday, and I heard the name and something in my chest locked like a bolt sliding home. It was not even the same name. Stephanie and Sarah are not the same name. I knew that. Some rational part of me registered it clearly. But the wound does not operate from the rational part. The wound operates from the place where your worst fear lives, and my worst fear had an address, and that address was Daniel standing in a kitchen talking about a woman from his office like it was nothing. I said, of course she did. He stopped. What? Nothing. I put the glass in the sink. Rachel. His voice was careful, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. What did I say? And that was when 10 years of stored artillery found its moment. I turned around and I let it come. All of it. The name, the office, the way he said it so casually, and then underneath that the original thing, the messages, the baseball memory, the grandfather he grieved, the intimacy he had given to someone else in year 2 of our marriage. And then the years of pretending, the counseling I had performed my way through, the flowers I had accepted without warmth, the anniversary trip I had survived like a hostage situation, all of it came out in a voice I did not entirely recognize as my own. He stood with his back against the counter, and he did not shout back. That was the thing about Daniel that I could never fully weaponize. He did not fight that way. He absorbed. And watching him absorb it, watching him stand there and take it, made me angrier somehow, because his composure felt like another form of withholding, and I told him that too. I felt the pressure behind my left eye like a fist pressing from the inside. I registered it and kept talking. I felt my fingers go slightly numb, and I registered that too and kept talking because I was finally saying everything and I was not going to stop, not this time, not after 10 years of careful silence. I was going to say all of it. Then the room tilted. Not dramatically. Not like the movies. It was subtle at first, like the floor had shifted 3 degrees, and I reached for the counter and my hand did not cooperate the way I expected it to. Daniel said my name. I heard it from a strange distance, like he was calling me from the end of a long hallway. The pressure behind my eye became a roar. My knees did not buckle so much as simply stop working, and the last thing I saw before the kitchen floor came up to meet me was Daniel's face changing from exhausted to terrified in the space of half a second. The last thing I thought was not about my daughters. It was not about God. It was not even about Daniel. My last conscious thought was that I had not finished saying what I needed to say. And then there was nothing. No sound. No kitchen. No cold glass of water in the sink. No 10 years of carefully maintained wounds. Just a silence so complete it had texture, and then, slowly, a pulling sensation that had nothing gentle about it, a drawing forward that I could not resist and did not choose, and the understanding, arriving without words, that wherever I was going regardless of whether I was ready. I was not ready. I want you to understand that. I was not ready, and it did not matter, and that is perhaps the first real thing the next 18 minutes taught me. That there are appointments you cannot reschedule. That there are courtrooms you cannot prepare for. That the version of yourself you have been curating for a decade means nothing when the record is already written. I left my body somewhere on that kitchen floor. And I went somewhere I did not have the language for yet. I saw Daniel first. That is the detail that still undoes me when I think about it. Not a light. Not a tunnel. Not a voice calling my name from somewhere beautiful. I saw my husband on his knees on our kitchen floor with both hands pressing against my chest, and the sound coming out of him was not a word. It was something underneath words. Something a man makes when the thing he has been afraid of for years is suddenly happening in front of him, and his hands are the only thing standing between it and the unthinkable. I watched him call 911. I watched him give our address in a voice that shook but stayed functional, the way Daniel always stayed functional in a crisis, and I watched him put the phone on the floor and go back to using both hands. And I understood with a clarity I cannot fully explain that he had not stopped. In 10 years of my careful coldness, in 10 years of 2 mugs on the counter that I walked past, in 10 years of flowers put in water without comment, he had not stopped. And then the kitchen was gone. Not gradually. It was simply replaced. One moment I was above my own body watching my husband try to keep me alive, and the next I was standing somewhere that had no walls I could identify and no ceiling I could find and no floor I could see, and yet I was standing. The ground beneath my feet was clear, completely transparent. And beneath it, far below, something moved. Not fire exactly. Something older than fire. Something that had the quality of fire without the chaos of it. Contained. Purposeful. Like heat that existed not to destroy but to reveal. The light in this place did not come from a source I could locate. It came from everywhere, and it was not warm the way people describe heaven as warm. It was clarifying. The way cold water is clarifying. The way the moment after you stop lying to yourself is clarifying. It pressed against me and I felt, with sudden and total certainty, that nothing I had rehearsed about myself would work here. I heard my own footsteps before I took a step. An echo that preceded the action, as though this place already knew where I was going before I did. Then I saw the book. It did not open dramatically. It was simply there, suspended in the air at the height of my chest, and it was open, and the pages were not paper. They were light that had been given the properties of a page. And on those pages, in a script I should not have been able to read and somehow read perfectly, were two names. Rachel Anne Whitfield. Daniel James Whitfield. And beneath our names, a date. October 14th, 2006. Our wedding date. And beneath the date, words that I recognized because I had spoken them myself in a church full of people 15 years ago. Words I had said in a white dress with my hands in Daniel's hands. Words that had felt enormous and permanent and true on that October afternoon. To love, to honor, to cherish, in sickness and in health, until death. I had said those words. I had meant them when I said them. And standing in that place with the glass floor beneath me and the light pressing against every rehearsed version of myself I had ever constructed, I felt the weight of the distance between who I was when I spoke those vows and who I had become in the years that followed. Then the projections began. That is the only word I have for what happened next. On every side of me, in the air around me, scenes began to appear. Not like a screen. More like memory made physical. Three-dimensional and immediate, and close enough to touch. The first one I saw was from year one of our marriage. Daniel and I in our first apartment, laughing over something I could not now remember, and the ease between us was so visible it almost hurt to watch. The way we moved around each other. The way he looked at me. I had forgotten that he used to look at me like that. Like I was something he could not believe he got to keep. Then year two. And here is where the courtroom did something I was not prepared for. I had replayed the betrayal in my mind 10,000 times. I knew my version of it perfectly. I had refined it over a decade into something airtight and irrefutable. I was the faithful wife. He was the man who went looking for intimacy outside the covenant. But the projection did not show me my version. It showed me the 6 months before the messages. It showed me a version of that period I had never once examined. I watched myself come home from work and move through our apartment like Daniel was furniture. I watched myself cancel 3 date nights in a row for reasons I could not now reconstruct. I watched Daniel try to start conversations that I redirected to logistics. I watched him suggest counseling once, gently, carefully, and I watched myself tell him I was fine in a tone that communicated the opposite of fine, and then leave the room. I watched him lonely. Not the loneliness of a man looking for an excuse. The loneliness of a man watching his wife disappear and not knowing how to reach her. I had never, in 10 years, considered that version of that season. I had gone straight from, he betrayed me, to, I am the victim, without once asking what the ground looked like before the seed was planted. I am not saying what he did was right. I want to be very clear about that. What he did was a covenant violation, and the pain it caused me was real and valid, and it mattered. The courtroom did not minimize that. What it refused to do was let that be the only truth in the room. Because then it showed me Stephanie. Not the version I had constructed in my mind over 10 years, the predatory version, the woman who had deliberately targeted my husband. It showed me a 29-year-old who was herself lonely and struggling, and who found in Daniel a kindness she was not getting elsewhere. It showed me their conversations not as seduction, but as two broken people finding a moment of being understood. It was still wrong. The boundary was still crossed. But it was human in a way I had refused to let it be for a decade, because keeping it monstrous kept me righteous. I have to stop here for a second, because what came next is the part that is still the hardest to say out loud. It showed me myself. Not the wound. Not the betrayal. Me. Across 10 years. Every cold shoulder rendered visible. Every calculated silence shown for what it was. Every moment I chose the wound over the marriage. Every moment I used Stephanie's name as a weapon in arguments she had nothing to do with. Every night I turned away from Daniel's hand reaching for mine in the dark. Every time Lily sat between us at a restaurant because she was trying to hold together what her mother had decided to quietly dismantle. I watched myself be cruel in ways I had never called cruelty because my cruelty wore the clothing of righteousness. I had been wronged. Therefore, everything I did in response was justified. That is what I had told myself. That is what the wound had told me. And standing in that courtroom on a glass floor with fire beneath me and my marriage record open in the air, I understood that the courtroom did not agree. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in what I am describing, stay with me. Please subscribe so you do not miss the rest of this testimony, because what the voice said to me next is the thing I needed to hear for 12 years, and I believe you may need to hear it too. The presence in that room was not visible. Not in the way I can describe with a face or a form. But it was there the way gravity is there. Undeniable. Not threatening. Not cruel. But absolutely, completely, without negotiation, honest. And it spoke. The first thing it said was this: "You received a wound, but you became a weapon." I felt those words the way you feel a bone being set. Necessary pain. The pain of something being put back into its correct position after years of being wrong. He repented. You recorded. And the record you kept became its own covenant breaking. I wanted to argue. I want to be honest about that. Even there, even in that place, some part of me wanted to present my case. To say yes, but. To say you do not understand what it felt like. To say I had reasons. But the record was open. And the record did not have a column for reasons. The third thing the presence said was quieter than the first two. Almost gentle. It said, forgiveness is not a feeling. It is a choice. And you have a choice to make right now. And then the projections stopped. And the book was still open. And my name and Daniel's name were still there on the page made of light. And the glass floor held me above whatever burned beneath it. And I stood in that silence, and I saw myself, clearly, for the first time in 12 years. Not the victim. Not the wronged wife. Not the woman with the moral high ground. Just Rachel. 42 years old. Carrying a wound that had grown larger than she was. Standing in a courtroom of truth, holding a record she had kept for a decade, being asked whether she was willing to put it down. Lord, I want to stop here and pray. Not a polished prayer. Not a church prayer. The kind you pray when there is nothing left to hide behind. Father, for the person watching this right now who has been carrying what I was carrying, the one who has been righteous in their wound for so long they cannot remember who they were before it. I am asking you to meet them right here. Not in a courtroom. In this moment. In whatever room they are sitting in. Let them feel what I felt when the record was opened. Not shame. Not condemnation. The truth. The full, freeing, terrifying truth that the wound they are protecting has become the weapon they are wielding. And Father, give them what you gave me in that place. Not just the sight of who they have become, but the genuine choice to become someone different. Heal what has been broken. On both sides. Amen. The courtroom did not end with a verdict. It ended with a question. And then, before I could answer it fully, I felt something I can only describe as an interruption. A pulling. A return. It was not my choice. It felt like being given more time I had not asked for and suddenly understood I desperately needed. I came back fighting. That is the only way I know how to describe it. Not peacefully. Not with a gentle gasp and soft eyes opening to the light. I came back like something being forced through a door that was too small for it, my chest convulsing, my body arching off the kitchen floor before the paramedics had even fully processed what was happening, and the sound I made was not a word and not a cry. It was something older than both. something that came from the place in a human being that exists below language. I heard voices before I could see faces. A man saying, she's back, in a tone that told me it had not been certain. A different voice calling out numbers. And underneath all of it, closer than any of the medical voices, one voice saying my name in a way that had nothing clinical about it. Saying it the way you say the name of something you almost lost. Daniel. I could not open my eyes immediately. My body felt like something that had been returned to me slightly wrong, like a jacket put on inside out, and every breath was an argument I had to win against my own lungs. But I could hear him. He was not touching me, because the paramedics were still working, but he was close, and he was saying my name, and I want to tell you something about that moment that I have never been able to fully explain. In that moment, hearing his voice, I did not feel the wound. For the first time in 10 years, I heard Daniel's voice, and the wound did not answer back. The record I had kept for a decade, the filing cabinet I had maintained with such precision, the evidence I had organized and cataloged and kept current, it was silent. Not because it had been erased, but because I had just stood in a room where the full record was open, and I had seen what my record had left out, and I could not in good conscience pick mine back up and pretend it was the whole truth. They transported me by ambulance. I was conscious by the time we reached the hospital, disoriented and frightened and unable to speak in full sentences, but conscious. The diagnosis came within the hour. Hypertensive stroke. Moderate. The neurologist used words like fortunate and window and how quickly your husband acted, and every time she mentioned Daniel, I felt something shift incrementally in my chest. Not painfully, more like ice beginning, very slowly, to consider the possibility of thaw. He was in the waiting room when they moved me to a room. They let him in, and he came and stood at the foot of my bed, and we looked at each other across 10 years of distance, and neither of us spoke for what felt like a long time. He looked like a man who had been through something. His shirt was still the one he had been wearing in the kitchen. He had not had time to change. He had simply followed the ambulance and waited and not left. I looked at him, and I thought about the projection in the courtroom. The one that showed him standing in the driveway in his car for 20 minutes before coming inside, preparing himself for my coldness. I thought about the 2 mugs on the counter every single morning. I thought about the flowers on Tuesday evenings that I put in water without comment for years. I said, "Can you come closer?" It was not a question. He came. I did not tell him everything that first night. I want to be honest about that, because I think there is something important in the honesty of it. I was not suddenly transformed into a woman with perfect words and perfect timing. I was a 42-year-old woman in a hospital bed with a blood pressure cuff on her arm and a marriage she had spent a decade carefully damaging. And the most I could manage that first night was to reach for his hand when he sat down beside me and hold it in a way I had not held it in years. Not the performative hand-holding of our counseling sessions. Not the public hand-holding of Sunday mornings in the 4th pew. The kind where you hold someone's hand because your hand needs to be in theirs and you are no longer interested in pretending otherwise. He did not ask me what had happened. He just held my hand back. And that was enough for that night. The conversation came 3 days later. The girls had gone home with my sister, and it was just the 2 of us in that hospital room in the late afternoon with the light coming through the blinds in long stripes across the floor. And I asked Daniel to pull his chair close to the bed, and I told him I needed to say something that I had never actually said. Not performed. Not managed. Actually said. I told him I had not forgiven him. I told him that every time I said I forgave him over the past 10 years, I was using the language of forgiveness while keeping the wound on life support, because the wound was the only thing that felt like power in a marriage where I had decided I was owed something indefinitely. I told him I had watched him try, genuinely try, for a decade, and I had accepted his efforts like payments toward a debt I had privately decided could never be fully settled. He was very still while I said all of this. Then I told him I was sorry. Not for what he did. For what I did with what he did. He put his face in his hands. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The way a man does when something he has carried alone for a very long time is finally being acknowledged by the one person whose acknowledgement he needed. When he looked up, his eyes were full and he said, "I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was imagining it." And I told him he was not imagining it. And I told him it was real, and it was wrong, and I was sorry. We cried together in that hospital room in a way we had not cried together in our entire marriage. Not the polished crying of counseling sessions. The ugly kind. The kind that means something. We started real counseling the following month. Not the performance I had given Dr. Pearson 10 years prior. I went in the first session and I said, out loud, to a stranger, that I had been using my husband's past sin as a mechanism of control for a decade, and I needed help learning how to stop. Daniel sat beside me and reached for my hand, and I let him take it, and I did not calculate what it meant or what it cost me. It cost me the wound. And the wound, I was finally beginning to understand, had been costing me everything else. The girls noticed. Children always notice, and they notice the good things just as quickly as they notice the damage. Lily stopped sitting between us at restaurants. I did not point it out to Daniel the first time it happened. I just felt it, quietly, like the first evidence of something beginning to grow back in soil that had been left bare for too long. I started sharing pieces of what I had seen in the courtroom slowly, carefully, first with my pastor, then with one trusted friend, then in a small women's group at our church. Every time I told it, something in the room shifted. Women who had been sitting with their arms folded would unfold them. Women who had come in looking composed would leave looking like they had put something heavy down. Because the wound I carried is not unique to me. I want you to hear that. The specific details are mine, but the pattern, the original hurt that becomes a permanent identity, the unforgiveness that puts on the clothing of self-protection, the record-keeping that masquerades as righteousness. That pattern lives in more marriages than anyone in the fourth pew is willing to admit on a Sunday morning. I started receiving messages. Women who said they had been married 15, 20, 25 years, and they recognized themselves in Rachel Whitfield. Men who said they had been Daniel for years, trying to reach a spouse who had decided the debt could never be paid. Young couples who said they were only in year 3, and they could already see the pattern forming, and they did not know how to stop it. One woman sent me a message that I still have on my phone. She said, "I have been performing forgiveness for 8 years. I did not know there was a difference between performing it and choosing it until I heard your story." I read that message and I sat in my car in a parking lot and I wept, because that is exactly it. That is the wound beneath the wound. Not just unforgiveness. The performance of forgiveness that protects the self while slowly poisoning the covenant. If you are in a marriage right now where you are carrying something you have never truly released, I am not asking you to minimize what was done to you. What was done to you is real. The pain was real. But I am asking you, from someone who stood in a courtroom where the full record was open and saw both sides, to consider the possibility that your wound has a shadow. And the shadow is what you have become in response to it. Because the courtroom does not only show you what was done to you, it shows you what you did with it. Put the record down. Not for your spouse. For the person you were before the wound convinced you that holding it was the same as surviving it. You are not the record. You are the covenant. And the covenant still has time. If this testimony reached something in you today, I would love to know where you are watching from. Leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to this channel, because there are more testimonies coming that carry the same truth this one carries. Truth that does not let you stay comfortable. Truth that sets you free.